Hey, this is Passy from Passy's World of ICT, the guy with the white hat. And today we're looking at writing XML files in Visual Basic. So we're going to use our data tables this time, which are an internal kind of Visual Basic feature that will help out a lot with this. I probably need to have watched the previous lesson on reading XML files, but let's get started on today's lesson. So as usual, it's a jam-packed lesson. So look, it's going to be in sections, so we'll try and tell you when it's best to pause and take a break. We suggest not even watching the whole video in one sitting, you know, just like do one part of it and leave it, and then with the timeline index that's in there, you can come back to it anyway and do the remaining section. So we're going to look at how to use data tables. So we're going to set up data tables to put our data into, and then we're going to be able to write that data out to an XML file. There's a few little sort of things we have to do along the way, like input validation, but we'll leave that to kind of part two in the second version of the program. We're using the same Tennis Dream Team players that we did in previous lessons. So these people will probably look familiar because you should have done like the reading XML files lesson. And yeah, we're doing that. So the finished program, we're going to have this data entry form where we can go through, and it's going to have a navigator, and you can like change data that's already in there. You can add new players, you can delete new players. It's going to be like a full little data system. So it'll look like that, and we'll just have a very quick look at it now. Where are we here? Right. Okay, so what it's got is you can like navigate through the players. So it comes with this nav bar, which is kind of part of data tables when you put it into Visual Basic, which is really cool. And you can like hit the plus there, and we can add a new record. So let's add a new record, Passy. Let's have Passy as a famous tennis player. Yeah, like Passy did play tennis, but he never got famous at it. And when was my birth date? Let's see, my birth date, obviously, let's see. Now, yeah, we're supposed to use dashes on this. So I'll show you what happens if you don't use dashes and try and save the record. See, it's going to tell us that's an invalid date format because we've used the slashes instead of minus signs. Because if you remember back to the other lesson in XML files, we're talking about it's best to use the dash symbol for your dates. And if, say, you forgot to put the country in and tried to save it, you know, it's going to say the correct country needs to be entered in the country box. Now, countries have to be at least one long. So if we put a U in, that's not going to work. But, you know, I think the shortest country would be like the UK. So I think everything's okay now. And if we save that, Passy will be in there, all right? And that saved it to the XML file, because if we go back into it, so you can see there, we've just restarted the program. Passy should now be there, and he is. Now, when you delete a record, it's a little bit tricky, as we'll see in the course when we do it. Delete record for Passy, no, if we don't want to. Record delete cancelled, but it rewinds to the first record. But if we go through, we can see Passy is still actually there. If we delete and say yes, it tells you have to save the changes. It's deleted it from the data table, but to actually save it out to the file, we have to click the save button as well. So that's pretty much it for the program, the finished program. And XML file types, go back to our previous lesson where we spoke about this, but here's a very quick review. We basically got records, and you can see this has got the tennis players in it. It's got tags, these things here, which say what each field is. We've just got name, country, and birth date for each person. And we've got 4 of them in our file. So the purpose of this program is the Tennis Dream Team. Now, you don't have to do the Tennis Dream Team. You could have a soccer dream team, a cricket dream team, maybe your 4 favorite guitarists or rappers or singers or something like that. Just some sort of dream team. Now, we've just made a nice small amount of data here, so it'll be easy to do in the program, but we've just got name, country, and their birth date with hyphens for the separators in there. So that's what we want to do. We just want to have this form where we can edit and maintain this list and write it out and save it permanently in our XML file. All right, so first up, we're just going to create the VB data table with name, country, and birth date. And that's going to be able to set up our whole data entry form system with that navigation bar and all the nice features that we saw before. So let's get into that. Now, this is a new VB project you need to make. So in Visual Studio, right, File, New Project. We just called ours Tennis Players Process XML. And then we need to create a VB dataset, and this is going to be our internal database. So it's not like setting up an array or anything in memory. It's actually setting up this kind of virtual database in memory, in program memory, that the program can use to store data as we enter it. So this is a 10-step process, so it takes a while. So let's get started with it. So when you've set up that new project and you've done a save all, in your Solution Explorer here on the right-hand side, you'll see the name of your project, like it's sort of hidden here by the fly-out boxes. But what we do is we right-clicked on that, and then we said Add, and then in the next fly-out box, we say New Item, okay? So that's step 1. And then step 2 is, in the New Items, you need to go down to this one, Dataset. So we need to click on Dataset. We're calling our dataset dsplayers.xsd. That line is just where the cursor happened to be on the screen when we did the screenshot. So it's dsplayers.xsd, and then you click the Add button. All right. Step 3. So you'll be taken into data sources. A thing called data sources will open up here on the side of your screen with a toolbox. And the one we want to have is a data table. So that's what we're working on. So you just hold down your left-hand mouse button and drag that out onto the form, and then it'll look like this. It'll make a data table on the form. Now, where this name is data table 1, you can actually click in there. So if you click on that name, as shown down the bottom here, step 4, you can edit that. So backspace, and we just call it dtab players. So dtab for data table, and players is the name of our data table. All right, on to step 5. Now with step 5, you actually click on your data table. It's been hidden by the flyout panels here, but our data table here, dtab players, right click on that, and now we're going to add all the columns or the fields that are going to be part of that table, all right? So we go add column. Now remember, we had 3 things, name, country, and birth date to add in. However, you will also need to have a player ID. So we need an extra 4th field, and that's the first field we add in, the player ID. Because we could be building this up over time and 2 players have the exact same name, and that's going to be a problem because we won't know who's who. So we need to have unique ID numbers for each of our players. So the first one I'm going to set up is player ID, a unique number which is called a primary key. Okay, so this will be data column 1. When you go add column, you'll see data column 1 come up inside your data table, and then we can click in that and edit it, and we're just going to call that player ID. Notice we're using Hungarian notation here without any spaces in between. And just do the same thing again, add column, or you could just use Control and L as it's saying here. 3 more times, add column, change the names by clicking in there, and you'll have player ID, player name, country, and birth date. Okay, so that's our data table defined with all of the field names in it, and that completes step 5. On to step 6. Now step 6, we can now do the properties for each of those columns that we've set up. So for player ID, that's the first one. So if you click in that one, down the bottom right-hand corner of your solution screen, as usual, you should see the properties for that, just like you'd see if you clicked on a form on a text box. You'd see all the properties for the text box of the button. These are all the properties for the player ID field we've set up. Now, because this one's going to be the primary key, this one has a special setup that's going to be different to all the other fields that we make, okay? So we need to have auto increment true. Seed as 1 means our player numbers will start at 1. Caption ID we're going to explain later, but we just put player space ID colon for that. It needs to be system int 32 for this number. Max length -1 means it can just be any length. Its length's not limited. You need read-only true, so that people can't edit this number, and unique is true so that you can't get two of them the same. So everyone will have their own unique player number. Now, when you set all that up, change all the fields so they look like this. A little key symbol will appear next to player ID with Visual Basic indicating that that is now the primary key or the unique identifier for records which you're going to have in this data table. Okay, so that was a little bit of setup there. With the other fields though, like player name, when we click on that, in the properties, there's only two things we need to look at. And the first one is that we're going to have to make sure data type should be system string. So because we're doing XML files, for everything we want system.string, the same way as it is on the form when they type into the text boxes that are going to result. Now the caption you change, caption can be player space name colon, but don't change the name down in here. Okay, this name has to match up with the data table. So in the data table, it's got the Hungarian name, player name. So this name in the properties has to stay as player name. Make sure you don't get mixed up and you do not change that one. You change this one, the caption. So this is going to become later on the labels on the form next to the text boxes. So this will be player space name colon, all right? So that one you can edit. This one, do not touch it, do not change it. Now, as we said, -1 for length just means it can be any length long. Okay, so that's how those are set up with all of these fields set like this. So check out all of them when you're setting this up. And then we go on to do our country. So country is just the same thing. The defaults, I think, will be should be right, and it'll have system string and all of that. You just need to make sure this one stays as it is, country, so it matches up with the name in the data table. This one you change to a caption country colon, all right? And you do the same thing on birth date. We just need to change it to birth space date colon for its caption when you do that one, but do not change it to date type. Even though this is a date, the data type in here, leave it as system.string. Do not change it to date type, okay? That's very important. It needs to stay as system.string. We need everything to be system.string. So that's step 9, so we must be getting near the end, yay! Step 10. So step 10, you do a save all on your project, which is these double sets of disks here, or you can go file, save all. Make sure you do save all when you're saving Visual Basic projects, so it only saves the active thing you're working on, not your whole project. And because we're finished with that data sources, the way you save that and just exit out of it is just by clicking the X button on the tab, dsplayers.xsd. Okay, so you just click that to exit out because we've finished making our actual data table. And when you go over and look in the top right-hand corner at Solution Explorer, you should find that, you've got your project there, but you also now have dsplayers.xsd. So if you need to go back into that data set and data table and maybe change a caption or a typing mistake you made on a caption or something like that, you can just double click on this, it'll reopen data sources and you can go back into there later on. So that is data table setup now completed. Now we might show you this in a later lesson, but I think you can define your whole data set and data table actually in the program code, so you don't have to go through all these panels. But I kind of like going through the panels just so I can see exactly what's going on and just have a look at all the settings and make sure everything looks okay. So I like doing it this way with the panels, but just be aware you may see other videos or other things on the web where it's all done in the code. So we might look at that another time and show you how to set one up just using coding. But today we're just sticking to using the panels. Even though it is 10 steps, once you've done them a couple of times, they all start to make sense and it's kind of okay. If you want to pause the video and take a break at this stage and try set up a data table, that might be an idea, and then you can come back, click on the timeline index. When you come back, we'll be up to adding the data table onto the form. All right, so we made the data table. Now we need to sort of get it out onto our form for our project. And from there on, it's kind of business as usual, making our Visual Basic application. So what we do is we go to View, up the top here. So we have our form open on the screen there. I suppose we should have mentioned that. So double click your form or have it open there sitting on the screen. And we go to View and then Other Windows and Data Sources. Okay, so you need to do that sequence for your first step. And when Data Sources opens back up again, this might all be shrunk up and you'll just see DS Players. There's these little arrows on the left-hand side. So just click on those little arrows to expand everything so you can see it. Then you'll be able to see our data table and all the fields that we added. And then on to step 3. So we can change things on here. So at the moment, player ID here, one of the fields, once you've expanded them all out, click on that down arrow. We need to change that to a label. All right, so most of our things will be text box. That's the default, and that's fine. We can leave name, country, birth date, all as text boxes because we just want a text box there where the user can type things in. But on player ID, we do not want them to be able to change the ID. We want the system to auto-generate that and increment it. So we need to change the player ID to a label. Don't leave it as a text box that the users could edit. We're just going to use that drop-down list and change it over to a label instead. If we wanted it to be invisible and not even be seen on the form, we could use this one down the bottom, none. Okay, so none will just mean it's still there in your data table and still get auto-generated with player numbers, but you just won't see that on the screen because we've set it to none, okay, for its type. Alrighty, so step 4 of 8, I think it is. There are 2 ways of displaying the data table on the form. Yeah, there's data grid view and there's details. Now we want details because that's more like your data entry form, and that's the one we showed you at the start of this lesson. Just to let you know though, in grid view, if you do pick grid view, kind of makes like a table, like in Word or Microsoft Excel. So it'll just put these things in columns and show them in a table, and you can edit them in the table and still save and add and all that sort of thing. But we want to use the details one, not data grid view. We might use that another time in another lesson, but today we're clicking on details. So you'll need to change that over and make sure it's in details. And now that we've got that all set up, that we just basically just change player ID into a label and we set this one to make sure it's details, we sort of click on that blue part there while it's highlighted, hold down your left mouse button and drag it out onto the form. And what should happen on your form is that it's going to give you all those captions that we set up as the labels, and it's going to make the text boxes for you for data entry, and it's going to make our player ID as a label, because remember we changed it from label to text box. If we hadn't done that, it would be a text box as well. All right, so it's setting up like our data entry form for us, and it's given us a navigation bar where we can add new records, delete, and save, although we've got to fix up save there, which is something we need to do with that in the next step. So let's get on to that. Now, for some reason, Visual Basic kind of just grays out the save button, that it's not active or it's inactive or not enabled. So the first thing after we've got all this onto our form by dragging it out in details mode, we need to right click onto that. Now to get onto this navigator section, down the bottom there's the players data set, there's the actual table, and there's the binding navigator, which is this part here. So you can click on that down underneath your screen form, or there's a little set of 4 dots gripper. I think if you click on the gripper as well in the left-hand corner of this, it'll be highlighted. So once it's highlighted, you should be able to right-click on that save icon. And what we need to do is we just need to change it over so it's enabled, all right? So we right-click on the save icon, change it to enabled, and then it should start showing up in blue, so it is active and we can use it. So that's step 6. Step 7, we want to move that navigation bar around the form. So we don't want to put up the top of the form here because we want to have like a title on our form. I want to be able to move that guy around. So again, you just need to click on it so it's activated. Click on the gripper, the dots at the left-hand end of it. But the thing is to have this little tiny little arrow appear up here, and then you can click on that arrow and it gives you options. So click on that arrow, and what we're going to do is in this button here where it's got render mode, okay, we're not going to worry about that one. It's on the next one, docking, where that thing's positioned or docked on the form. At the moment, it's docked across the top here. And there's other positions, like the middle position, it seems to go all crazy when you try that out. You can have it right down the very bottom of your form, but we want to actually have dock. So we click on this down arrow, we want to use none. And that means we'll be able to move it around ourselves to anywhere where we want it on the form, okay? So when we're moving it around too, when you set it to none, it's these 4 dots gripper here on the corner. You kind of push down your mouse on that, and that kind of allows you to grab it and move it around, okay? So it doesn't have the normal kind of north, south, east, west crossing. It has this 4 dots gripper thing on it to move it around. Right, so then all we did was, I'll just go back. See, it was set up kind of this, all plain and ordinary, but we could move this around because we'd set it to none and all of that. So we just did the usual sort of thing and set up some colors. So system hot track for the background. We're using steel blue here, light steel blue for that background. Black, white, and smoky white, which isn't quite as intense as full on white. Font sizes are 10, 12, and 14 that we've used there. Back color of the label, yeah, we changed player ID to have a white back color, same as the text boxes. That way it looks like a text box and kind of looks neat, but people won't actually be able to type in there and change data. And that's it, that's step 8 completed. And we've now got this really nice little data entry form that's got like a plus on it for adding new records, an X for deleting records. We can save changes after we've made them or save a new record that we've made. And we've also got a navigator, so we can flick through all of our records. So that is a really cool thing. And just loving these data tables, which are in Visual Basic. It's really great. So there were 2 kind of things, a 10-step process to build the table in memory. And then we had an 8-step little process here to get it out onto our form and get it looking really nice like this. Okay, so I think we're ready to do coding. So don't take a break, just stick around, let's do the coding. Okay, so double click on the blank area of the form anywhere and public class form 1. The first thing you need to do is dimension the XML file. So we'll just have my XML file equals playerdetails.xml. That's where we're gonna write data out to. And if this program's rerunning from a previous run, because we've already added some players in, closed the program previously, saved all our stuff, and we're coming back in to do some changes or add some more players. In the form 1 load, when the form loads up, we just say, as long as that file exists, as long as it's there, this my XML file, player details, just read it all in. Now this is really cool, this. 1 line of code will read that whole XML file of all its tags and stuff in it and indenting into that data players table that we've set up, and just take off all of the tags and that and just get the data in there. So this is the power of object-oriented programming. 1 line to read it in. Not like the reading XML lesson we did previously. We had to mess around going, oh yeah, there's going to be tags in there. We better tell it about the nodes and the node list and do all this stuff. 1 line here will take the XML file, bang, put it into that data table we set up in memory. So that is really neat. So that's the first lot of coding that we put in. And then after that, we need some coding for the save icon, because when you add a new record, the save icon just saves it into that data table in memory. But what we want to do is every time they do a save, we want to just write the whole data table back out to the XML file, okay, to have a fresh copy, the latest copy of all of the data with the changes included in it. So I actually need some code behind that to write to the XML file, because the navigator only writes to the internal data table that's in computer memory. So again, look, it's so simple. We don't need many lines of codes to do it. So this is just the event. If you double click on that save icon here up in the top right hand corner, the navigator bar, just double click on that. It'll take you into an event for it, for when people click the save item on the binding navigator. Okay, so we'll need to add validation, but we're going to do that in stage 2 of the program, because that's kind of a big job. You know, validation's a big job because we've done it in previous lessons. But we just stop any further editing. So you have to close the thing off while you're going to be saving it, so that no one's editing it. And then we just have a try, catch, end try, because you should always do that when you're writing a file, so you can give a message if it didn't work. And we just, again, one line. All we have to do is take everything that's in our DS players and bang, put it out into the XML file. Visual Basic's going to organize all the tags, all the formatting for us, everything, and we can just do it with one line of code. Hallelujah, I love VBNet and object-oriented programming. And we need to give a message box to the people to tell them that it did save successfully and the file is saved. If our try-catch bombs out and something goes wrong, well, we need to tell them the data didn't save, that there was a file save error. So always have your try, catch, end try there whenever you're writing out a file. And you should have picked that up already from what we've done in previous lessons to do with files. So when we test this, if we click on the plus button, so we've got the 4 players in there already. And no, hang on. What are we doing here? This is when we first start up. So when you click the plus, it'll be on player number 1. So we type in the details for player number 1 and we hit the save button, okay? So after typing all those details in, Alden, his country, his birth date, click the save button. It should say data saved successfully, so we can click the OK button, and then we can get on to doing our second player. So we click the plus button. It'll come up with a 2 here that we're on player number 2. It'll put player ID 2 in there. Remember, we had that set to auto increment. And then we can put in Anna Blinkova, Russia, and her birth date, hit the save button, and that will be saved successfully. And then we just repeat that, do another plus, and we can put in Bernarda Pera from the United States, her birth date, save her, and then do a plus button, and we can have John Patrick Smith, the Australian guy, and put in his birth date, and save it, and click OK. All right, so when we flick through the records, using the navigation arrows, we should see those 4 players in there now. And because we've saved it, we should be able to close the program down and then reopen it up, as you saw at the start of this lesson. And then there will be players in there we can flick through. Now, when you delete the record, the way it's set up originally is there's no confirmation message that the delete worked. And you also have to do that save afterwards to make sure it actually gets committed, the save. And so that's kind of a bit iffy. And we need to fix that up by adding some program code, just some extra code onto that red X delete button. All right, so using this red X delete, if we've got a new player we added there like Marton from Hungary, but we decided, oh no, we only wanted 4 on the dream team, we better delete him. Using that red X to delete the record, it deletes it from our data table in memory. So this will drop down to 4 records, and when you flick through, you won't see him anymore. But the thing is, if you close the program, reopen it, he'll still be there. You have to sort of actually do the delete and then do a save straight away afterwards. So it saves the data table without him in it. Okay, so we also want to have an "Are you sure" message. Whenever people do deletes, you want to have an "Are you sure?" because maybe they meant to click save and they've accidentally clicked the delete one. So you want to sort of let them get out of that. What's this called? This is called tolerance, that your program has tolerance. It tolerates user mistakes. So we should always have an "Are you sure" on a delete. So we need to get that coded in there as well. That's just good kind of design practice. So we're going to add this code. So we double click on that red delete icon on the nav bar, and that'll give us the event for when someone clicks the delete item. And what we're going to have is, and this will make more sense maybe when you see the testing results afterwards, but first we're going to have the "Are you sure" message. So it's using a message box as usual, but what we do is on the message box, we add another parameter in there. So we have this confirm delete, message box buttons yes, no, and that's going to give us sort of yes, no buttons on the message box, as you'll see in the testing. And we've also got the type of message box icons that's going to be an information message, all right? So with these message box buttons yes, no, you can check which one the user has clicked. So if they click yes, VB yes, that they do want to delete it, we need to tell them the record's been marked for deletion, but they have to click the save icon to save those changes and permanently delete the record, okay? So sending them out that message hopefully should make them realize, oh yeah, I just hit the red X, but oh, it says you have to save the changes. Okay, well, I'll hit the save button and then everything will be good and the thing will be actually deleted. And of course, if they've made a mistake and oops, they don't want to delete it, that's where our else will come in on that if statement. And we tried all sorts of things to try and just like clear out the data table of the changes and things like that. But we had all these program crashes and we had difficulties doing that. This was just something which ended up being really hard, so much harder than we thought it was going to be. But what we did was you did a little bit of lateral thinking and we thought, okay, at the beginning, the form load process, remember how that loads up the last version of the XML file? We thought, why don't we just redo that form load process and bring in the last version before they were accidentally trying to delete that record, and then we should be okay. All right, so what we did was we just had this me.controls clear, and we got this from Stack Overflow after quite a bit of Googling, and load all the controls again, and then just load the form, do the form load subroutine again with these two parameters, E and E, so it does everything and every event. And yeah, that worked fine. So that will kind of, if they've accidentally already hit the X, it will have deleted it out of the data table in memory. So what we need to do is just quickly go, oop, let's go back to form load and reload the whole thing. All right, the only thing is it does rewind the file back to the first record when you do that, but we've sort of put that as part of the message here, file return to first record. But look, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So here's what happens if they click X, which will have deleted it out of the data table and is a bit of an oopsie, but we can get it back. So we're just going to say delete that record for Marton, yes or no. And if they pick no, what's going to happen then is that we will go back and redo that form load process, but that kind of rewinds it. So we don't see Marton, we're rewound all the way to record 1, which is Alden. So we said record delete cancelled, file return to first record. And if you click that OK and use the navigator and flip forward, you will find that Marton is still there at number 5, like he was originally before you accidentally hit the red X. So that processing we did all works fine and that's all good. The only thing is that you had to make sure when they were adding Marton originally, that he was already added and they'd done a save. If they were kind of adding this thinking about, ooh, I might have him in there, I might not, then they click delete, this process still should actually do nothing and bring back the right XML version of the file, and we should have the records we need, okay? But that all works fine. So they can cancel out of a delete, and by rereading the XML file, we'll get the data table back set up with that record in there. All right, for the situation where they say yes, where they really do want to delete it, so on Marton here, they've hit the red X, delete him, and they say yes. What will happen is we tell them the record is marked for deletion because it's been taken out of the data table in memory, but it's still sitting in the XML file from when they originally set up Marton and saved him. So we've got to get them to actually hit the save button, which will take everything that's in the data table and make a new version of the XML file. And that means that new version will not have Marton in it. So yeah, they hit the save button, it'll just say the usual data save successfully message. And so, yeah, that's really important that if they wanted to delete someone, they have to actually hit the red X and then hit the save to commit the changes, all right? So we then closed the program and we ran it again and record 5 wasn't there. So we know that deletion when they confirmed and said, yes, that all worked. So that was all good. And of course, we need to check the output XML file. And when we did that, we saw that Marton wasn't in there. We just had the other 4 records, so that's good. So we checked it in kind of Edge or that Office XML handler. Also had a look at it in Notepad just to check the indentation and all of that. So that all looked fine as well. So definitely good, just 4 players in there. And look, isn't the Edge and Internet Explorer so much easier to read than this one? I really like that display they've got there. That's nice. Okay, so that's checking the output XML file. Now you may want to take a break at this stage, because we've been going for 34 minutes. And it's going to be a long lesson, because the thing about validation is, you know, it's taken us 34 minutes to go through how to get our little data entry program working so it does saves and deletes, and it's pretty much finished. But the thing is that if they type rubbish in for some player, we don't want that getting written out to the XML file. We want to keep it nice and clean and not let bad data get out there. Or if they forget to fill in the country or whatever, we don't want some player going in the dream team without their country on it. So look, you might even come back to this another time and do version 2 where we're adding the validation, because it's probably going to take another half an hour, possibly, just to do the validation. So validation's like another programming task in itself. It's always a big job, but it's just an essential thing which apps have to have. And the good news about this validation is we'll be able to copy and paste a lot of our old validation from other programs to do it quickly and easily. So let's get on with it. So before I save the record, like we said, got to check that data that they've typed in is as good as we can get from them, all right? And there's no kind of mistakes in there, or they haven't left things out. So the first thing we do is we make a copy of the existing program. So we'll leave version 1 there as it is. So on its top level folder, you know, you can Control-C, Control-V and make another folder, and this is going to be the version 2 one. Open that up in Visual Studio, and the first thing we're going to do is up the top of that program, we'll just say that it's version 2, but we're going to add some public variables here: str player name, str country, birth date, and also a Boolean one for the validation, that when we're finished validating, if all inputs are valid is true, it's going to be good. But initially we'll just suspect that something's wrong and set them to false. So that goes up the top of the program. That's the first thing we do for version 2. All right, so all of this needs to go on the save icon event code. All right, so when they're saving, they will have clicked that save button, which will have put it into the data table, but we want to make sure it can't get written out to the file permanently if the data isn't any good. All right, so where you've got that existing thing with save item, we're keeping all of the code from version 1. We're just adding new stuff into it. So the first thing we need to do before we write it to the XML file from version 1 is we need to add this new stuff in. So those variables we set up at the top, we just need to grab the stuff off the form, the player name text box, that's what it's called in the data table. The text out of that, the country and the birth date, and just put them into these program variables, okay? So we can get copies of what's on the form and put them in here. We're going to set that at the moment the inputs aren't all valid because we haven't done the checking. We're going to write a separate validation subs routine, like submarines or something. I'll have to fix that. Subroutine to validate the user inputs, all right? And then if, when we come back from that subroutine that's checked all of the name, country and date, if they're no good, we're just going to exit out this sub, and that way we won't go down in here and save anything out to the XML file. And we will have put out error messages telling them, hey, you've got to fix stuff, you've got to fix stuff. So let's go down and have a look at this validate subroutine that we're writing, this separate subroutine. So this is a separate subroutine called validate user inputs. So public sub validate user inputs. We're setting them all to false because we haven't done them yet. So first we can just check that the name and country aren't blank. They're easy checks. So let's do that. So the player name, look, someone could have a name like AJ that's only got 2 letters or something. So we're just going to say that as long as it's at least 1 letter, it's going to be okay. On the country though, we're going to say it has to be greater than 1, because I think the shortest country you can have is like the UK in England, the UK. So I don't think you can have a 1-letter country. I never heard of one anyway. So we'll just say that the length of that has to be greater than 1. All right, so you have to have sort of like a country length of at least 2, and then it's going to be all right. If that's not the case, we'll then tell them the message box that they need to put a country in and exit from the sub, okay? Because we don't need to do any more checking. As soon as we find something's wrong, let's just give them one thing to fix at a time. And also notice the focus here to send the cursor back to the text box where the error is, where they need to make the fix. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. Doing the player name and the country. Where it gets, well, not bad, but just more work to do is the date. Okay, so we need to validate the birth date. Now, you should be doing our course in order. Should have done the dates processing lesson already. And this is why you need to do them in order. And in the dates processing lesson, it had all this stuff about how to validate a birth date. So we're taking the birth date and calculating the person's age from the birth date in that lesson. So you should already know this, but if you don't know it, we're just going to use all the code and ideas from that lesson. All right, so we need to do 3 checks here. Check the birth date's not blank. Check that they put it as, for Australia, as day, day, dash, month, month, dash. So they use dashes and not slashes, not forward slashes. Check it's a real date, that they haven't, typed that the month number is 14 or something when there's only 12 months in a year. We also will have to do a future date check as our last check later on, so there's going to be 4 checks. But these 3 checks, we made a function in that dates processing lesson, so we're just going to reuse that function. So pretty much copying the code from that lesson, and what we're doing is we're getting the birth date text off the form here, and we're just putting that in str user input date for our function, str input date name for the function because it needed a name as well for doing error messages. This is birth date that we're doing, and the result from the function, whether it's valid or not, Boolean date is valid, we're setting that to false. So all of those things get passed down by this kind of line of code here, and you'll need to go back and look at functions in the dates lesson if you don't understand this, because we're not going to re-explain it here. But this function it was set up for / dates. We're going to have to make a slight change, as you'll see in a minute, for it to cope with dashes. And then after it's done that function and done these 3 checks of the date, if it passes back that it's false, that must mean there's some problem with the date. We're just going to set all inputs valid equals false, that something's wrong, we're not ready to write out to XML because something's wrong with one of the inputs, and we're going to exit from this subroutine, okay, and not do any more checking. All right, so the function, that goes right down the very bottom of your program. Now, because in the second check, we're going to use regex, regular expressions, just up the top, very top of your program. So we're doing top and bottom here, up the top where it's public class form 1. Remember to have your import system.text.regular expressions. If you don't have it, you'll get an error showing up when you try and run your program anyway. But yeah, your code public function, and we put all this stuff in, that what's getting passed in is an incoming date, an incoming name for what sort of date it is. And this is Boolean, so it sets a true false for valid input date check, and that's what gets passed back up to the subroutine. We got the first check, same as in the dates lesson. We're just checking that the date's not left blank. Then we go on to the second checking, which has the regex pattern matching. But notice that we have changed in the dates lesson where these minus signs were for the separators. We had forward slashes, so we have just made 1 line program change just to put 2 minuses in there instead of forward slashes, and that's going to make sure they've entered it as like 0503-2018 or whatever they need to put in. So that's all going to be good, and we can give an error message if they did not do that. And then the last function check is to check it's a real date, so it's not something like 43/15/18, all right, that it's real kind of numbers for how many days in the month, and a real month not bigger than 12. And if something's wrong, we give them this error message, okay? So you might want to get the download for this lesson, and then that way you've got all the code kind of written out in order, and you can look at this, because we're kind of going to be jumping all over the place here. But anyway, that's where we end the function. So that's all our function code written. So it's basically a copy and paste of what we did in the dates processing lesson when we built this nice little function to check dates. And isn't this cool? Because, we made that function, and now we've kind of got this thing we can use another time in another program. That's why functions are so good and so handy to have around. And after being programming for a while, you'll have your own kind of little set of functions and things that you've made. And it's kind of like these little tools you've made that you can use on other jobs. And it's really good, really, really good functions. Right, so now when we finish that, doing the function, we'll come back up to the validation routine. And if everything was good, that it wasn't blank, it had the dashes in it, wasn't some weird date like 43/15-99999, then we're ready to just do the last check, which is to make sure it's not future dated. So a birth date can't be future dated. So we just get today's date off the system, date.now, check that the thing, if the birth date's bigger then the current date, well, then we've got a problem because you can't have a birth date if you're not born yet. So put out an error message. And if something did go wrong with the function though, that we just showed you before, what'll happen is above this code here, we've got this other code we showed you before, that if that function passed back that it was false, it would have exited the sub. So this code's kind of sitting up here, it would have just exited and it wouldn't come down and do this code, right? So yeah, it's best to get the download and get a full copy of the code, and then you can read through it yourself and it'll all kind of make a bit better sense than just being on individual kind of screens here as we present it. But that's all of the validation subroutine done. So we've kind of got three levels happening here. We've got the save icon button subroutine that was existing, and just at the start of that we've added a little bit to just say, hey, go do the validation module. So we've just actually finished all the code for that validation module, the second level down. And there was a third level because that validation module actually called down to the function, which was right down the bottom of our program, to do the standard 3 date checks for dates. So that's good. So after that completes, we will come back up into the save icon routine. So I've actually just finished doing that function, validate user inputs, which is on the save thing back where we started. And so if all the input data, if it's not valid, if there was some problem reported back by that validation, then we just need to exit out of this sub, because remember, we do not want to go down here and write out to the XML file if something's wrong with that entry that's on our form on the screen at the moment. So we exit sub. But if the data is all A-OK, so these are two signs here, the two arrowheads means not equal to, by the way, in Visual Basic. So if it's not equal to true, obviously if it's false, then we exit the sub. If it is all okay, we'll come down into here and it's good. We just use that same code we had in version 1 and we can write it out to the XML file. And so that's version 2 finished, and now we need to test it all. And because we did validation, there's going to be a lot of testing. So if you want to pause the video and take a break, or even just go to the timeline and skip the testing, because you kind of figure, okay, yeah, no, I know I have to test it and all that, blah, 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 I won't bother. To save time, here we go. So for all these tests, what we're doing is we're clicking that orange plus sign. We were then going to have some invalid data on the screen and try and click the save button and see what happened, and it shouldn't have let us do the save. So first thing, just leave the player name blank, so we haven't put a player name in. Try and click that save button. It says player name needs to be entered, and that makes sense, and click OK, so it won't let us continue any further. If we put the name in, like we put in Martin's name there, okay, but we haven't done the country and we try and click that save button, it's going to say, no, you need to enter a country into the country box, okay? So that's all working well. And continuing on, if we just put one letter for the country, like the letter H, we'll still get that error, because remember we wanted at least 2 letters, because the shortest country was like the UK. And so the correct country needs to be entered in the country box. We've still got a problem there. Once we fix that problem, we put in Hungary and we try click the save button again, because we just want to click that save button and get this finished. It'll notice there's no birth date in there, so you've got to enter a birth date. So please enter birth date, click the OK on that. And then while we're doing the birth date, of course we mess it up. We forget to read here and see that it's got dashes in it, and we just do our good old forward slashes. It's not going to like that. It's going to give us an error message from the regular expressions regex checking and tell us it has to be like 05-03-2018. So these need to be dashes, not slashes. And then when we fix it up so they're dashes, but we make a little mistake and put, instead of 02, we've suddenly got 22 for the month. Well, then it's going to see, ooh, that's not a real date. So it'll tell us that it's not a real date, tell us what the rejected date is. And we're going to need to fix that. So we click OK and go ahead with that. Then we just decide to make it future dated. So Martin's not born yet. He's not going to be born until 2039, which is quite a long time away from now. Another 20 years off. But that can't happen. We can't have future dated birth dates. So tell them the current date today, by the way, is the 24th of April, 2019. So there's no way you can have a future date like that. We're not going to let that through. So that's all good. And when you finally fix it up and get it all 100% correct and it passes all the validation, then it should save okay and you get the data saved successfully. So finally, when all the inputs are correct, then our validation will actually let it go through and let it get saved out permanently to the XML output file from the data table. So we need to check that XML file and make sure that was all good. And when we check it, we can see, yeah, we've got our 4 existing players and only the good version, that final version of Marton, was saved out. All those bad ones we were doing where we're stumbling and bumbling and messing things up, leaving countries out and getting the date wrong and future dated, none of those records got written out, right? The validation worked. It stopped them. It was like a bouncer out the front of the club saying, nope, no way you're getting in because you're no good. You're not right at the moment, okay? So that all worked fine. That's really good. And that's the validation finished. And yeah, that took like another 20 minutes. So it took 30 minutes to kind of set up the data table and do the whole program. And then another 20 minutes to do validation, just in this video showing you really quickly. So that shows you, it sort of 40% of your time or 30% of the time the program's doing validation and testing it, because it means you have to do a whole lot more tests as well. But you have to do that, guys. That's how we build a good application. We're not here to mess around and make, average applications. We're up for doing the best. All right, so hopefully this lesson's given you a great appreciation of object-oriented program. Like you saw, we only needed 1 line of code to take our whole data table, everything, all the things on those forms that we typed in for all of our players, just 1 line of code, bang, it was out in an XML file fully formatted for us. And reading it in as well, when we wanted to bring in the latest version of our players, it could just take the XML file. We didn't have to worry about where the tags were, what their names were, or anything. Bang, it just put it straight into the data table. So that data table was just awesome, and it had that navigation bar on it for saving and deleting. Sure, we had to make a few little program changes for that to all work properly to hook into the XML file. But basically, it's like a bathroom renovation. Like, you wouldn't kind of hand build the cabinet with some drawers and make the drawers yourself and sort of get the basins separate and do all that stuff, right? No one does it that way anymore. That was kind of the old days. So we didn't have to build this with our bare hands like in the previous lesson when we were doing node lists and all this messing around with the XML. This object-oriented programming is good. It's kind of like flat packs and things that are pre-built. So we've already got the whole bathroom sinks and everything built. All we've got to do is be like this plumber and just do a bit of a kind of, a few little things and that to get it all connected into our program, all right? So that is great. That is the power of object-oriented programming, and that's why it's so good. We don't have to build all these things with our bare hands, especially with a great system like VBNet. Like, Microsoft have got it so right with this programming package with the pre-builts that are in there. It's just awesome, because I've built things with my bare hands, and look, this is so much more fun and so much better. All right, so the challenge task is for you to make your own Dream Team player facts program. So you might add some extra fields in too. You might have another date, the date they actually turned professional. And it doesn't have to be tennis. It could be, your basketball dream team, your cricket dream team, your soccer dream team. Could even be musicians or music or dancers or something like that, or famous Baroque composers like Vivaldi and Bach, whatever it is that you want to do. Your highest ever player ranking and maybe what they've earned so far, their latest career money earnings total. So yeah, you could add a bit more in and have a bit more of a data form and get all of that written out so it's permanently stored in an XML storage file. And this sort of exercise will really be helpful for people here in Melbourne, Australia, doing software development for their Unit 4 Outcome 1 task, where they actually have to build an application, because all built applications need to be having some data entered, having it validated, and having it stored permanently. So bingo bango, this is exactly what you need for Unit 4 Outcome 1. So we've got our whole programming course there. So remember, that is on PassyWorldOfICT.com programming. So you can go back there and find that Read XML lesson if you didn't really understand the structure of XML files. and go back and revise that. The dates processing lesson, you can go back and revise that, find out where it is. You can also find out where the functions lesson was if you didn't understand any of that stuff we did when we were building our function, because you need to have done the lessons in order. And of course, you need to have tried to remember all of the stuff as well. So look, thanks for joining us for this lesson. And yeah, look, if this video helps you, give it a big thumbs up like on YouTube, because that helps us out. And subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our updates. And then you'll always be permanently linked to the guy with the white hat for all of the best VBNet tutorials. So yeah, make sure you do that, subscribe, and we'll see you next week in the next lesson. And until then, have fun programming with Visual Basic.